On Point Blank tonight, we speak to officials of the American Embassy or the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy has a new visa policy, the expanded screening and vetting for visa applicants. Let's go to the phone line and speak to Elliot Fettick, who is the Consul General at the U.S. Embassy here in Accra. Good evening. Thank you very much for your time, Elliot.
Good evening, Fami. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be on the air with your listeners.
First of all, what are these new guidelines or requirements for applicants of the F, M, and J visas?
Yes. So, as you may know, we recently resumed the scheduling of new student visa appointments. But as part of this process, we are now engaged in enhanced vetting of applicants' online presence and their social media accounts. And the reason for this enhanced vetting is to make sure that they qualify for the visa and do not pose any kind of danger to the security of the United States. This is something we've always done, actually. We've always reserved the right to engage in looking at a person's entire picture, whether that be their online presence, the answers they give during the interview, documents, or anything else. What is new is that we are giving a particular focus on the online presence for student visas. And in particular, we're now asking student applicants, before they come for an interview, to set their social media accounts to a public profile to facilitate this enhanced vetting.
Why has it become necessary to vet these social media accounts?
Well, as I said, this is something we've always had reserved the right to do. Under this administration, there is definitely an emphasis on making sure that visa applicants qualify for the visa and do not pose a risk to the security of the United States. And this enhanced vetting is simply to make sure that students who want to come to the United States and study are coming to do that and not coming for any other purpose and do not have anything else in their background, which would mean that they do not qualify for the visa.
Elliot, how does the U.S. Department of State detect or handle cases of fraudulent documentation in visa application?
We take those cases of visa fraud, including those involving documents, extremely seriously. Our officers, when they do interviews, first of all, they usually don't look at documents. But when they do look at documents, they are trained to see things that are fake, and they can usually catch them very quickly because they've had a lot of experience looking at documents. Engaging in fraud, including with fake documents, is a very serious matter. Someone who is engaged in visa fraud can face a range of penalties, starting with that their visa application will be denied. They also could be barred from entering the United States for a certain period of time, up to and including life, and they may be subject to prosecution under both United States and Ghanaian law.
Can you elaborate on the consequence of, let's say, I have a visa, but I have overstayed in the U.S., and how is this going to affect my future applications?
Absolutely. The consequences of overstaying your visa, just like the consequences of any kind of violation of U.S. immigration law, are very severe. If you overstay your visa, you face the potential that you will not be allowed to readmit it to the United States. You could be deported. Any future visa applications you make could be denied. You may even be subject to criminal prosecution. It just isn't worth it. But perhaps the most stark consequence for people who don't obey the rules, people who overstay or they engage in visa fraud, is they make it harder for law-abiding Ghanaians to get visas in the future. And we know that most of the people who apply for a visa from Ghana want to come to the United States for legitimate purposes. They want to come for a short period, study, travel, engage in business, and then come back. And unfortunately, these cases where people do not follow the law make it harder for everyone.
How do you advise Ghanaians, who are bent on traveling to the U.S., but in the process, they do not know the process? They may want to engage the services of, locally we call them agents, to help them secure the visas. What advice do you have with such individuals?
Sure. I would say two things to applicants who are considering engaging the services of a third party for any kind of help with the visa process. First of all, you can do the visa process, applying for a visa yourself. The instructions on how to do so are clearly outlined on our website, and it can give you step-by-step instructions on what you need to do to apply for a visa. Furthermore, on our website, there are phone lines that you can call and email addresses that you can write to if you encounter any difficulties during the visa application process. The second thing I would say is that you should beware of anyone who claims that they have some sort of inside track or they have a special advantage they can give you, when you're applying for a visa or trying to get a visa appointment. They are not telling you the truth. There is no special way to get a visa or to get a visa appointment. The only way is to follow the process that everyone else does. And people who say that, sometimes people say they can do special things and they charge thousands of dollars. And I have to tell you, sometimes we get very sad stories of people who come to us and tell us, I paid, $5,000 and they told me I would get a visa. And of course, they don't get a visa. And we work with the Ghanaian authorities to try to catch people who engage in visa fraud or people who rip off ordinary Ghanaians as part of the visa process. But still, the best way to prevent this is not to do it in the first place.
Hello, the accusation from people who may want to engage the services of these agents is that the process is cumbersome, and so they want to get someone who has an idea to help them get into the system. Is the process cumbersome?
I don't think it's cumbersome. I think that it is. I mean, it is straightforward, as is outlined on our website. It explains to you how you can go online. With our online website, you make an account. It tells you how you can pay for the visa application fee, and then it tells you how you can make an appointment. Now, are there some people who, like travel agents, who might help you through the process for a small fee? I'm sure there are people like that, and as long as they don't try to evade the regular procedures, I have no quarrel with them. But I can tell you that the vast majority of the people who apply for visas at the U.S. Embassy do it on their own. They do not engage the help of a third party, and they tell us that they have found that they understand the process and they're able to do it without having to pay any extra money.
If I have a date and I'm going for an interview, how do I prepare for such an interview? Because we are told that your performance at the interview will determine whether you get a visa or not.
That's a great question, and I'm happy to give some thoughts about the best way to get ready for the visa interview itself. First of all applicants should remember that most visa interviews are very short. Our officers have to see sometimes over 100 people a day, and that means they have to make decisions quickly, and they do the interview in a relatively short amount of time, which means that you have to be prepared to put your best foot forward and show the officer that you qualify for the visa. The second thing I will say is that in general, most of the time, officers are not going to look at your documents. They simply don't have time. Instead, what they're going to do is they're relying upon what you tell them during the interview. Your answers to the officer's questions are the most important thing for the officer when they are deciding whether or not you qualify for the visa. The third thing is that there are some common questions, especially for tourist visas or student visas, that you should be prepared to answer. For example, for tourist visas, the officer may ask you questions like, why do you want to go to the United States? What is your job or your occupation here in Ghana? Or have you ever traveled outside of Ghana before? For a student interview, they'll probably ask you questions about what do you intend to study in the United States? Tell them about your academic background. And they will also ask you, how are you going to pay for your studies? Which is an important question because studying in the United States is not cheap. And believe me, I know, because I'm sending my oldest son off to college in America right now, and it is not a cheap thing to do.
But even if the person, gets admission, shows the documents of admission process, and goes to the interview, and you still want to ask how the person is going to pay, even the person has admission, would that be an issue?
Can you repeat the question? I don't think I quite caught it.
I'm saying that even when the person shows documents of admission and comes in for an interview, and you ask that, what is the purpose, or more or less like, how is the person going to pay for the fees? If I show admission letter, do I still, sure. Or do you still ask how I'm going to pay the fees?
Sure. I think that if I understand your question correctly, you're asking about documents and how are they looked at by the interviewing officer. I think that in general, as I said before, most of the time they don't look at it. Sometimes they do, and I'm not saying that applicants shouldn't bring documents at all. You should be prepared for it, but just be aware. But of course, first be aware that it's likely they will not be looked at, and second, the most important thing also is to bring only real documents. We see people who bring fake documents, and unfortunately, sometimes they even are people who might have otherwise qualified for the visa. But if you bring a fake document to your interview, that destroys your credibility, and we're not going to give you the visa.
There are some concerns about the system of making payments before securing an interview appointment, which is limited. Is it possible to make appointment after getting the appointment date?
Unfortunately, it is not. Under U.S. law, the State Department, the embassy, must charge each visa applicant the exact cost of how much it costs for us to process the visa application, no more, no less. And that means that when we charge the application fee, that cost is going directly to paying for how we process the visas, the officers and just the time that it takes to do so. And that means that whether or not the visa is issued or denied, we've still spent the money to process the visa, and that is why we are not able to. The person has to pay regardless of the outcome. I will say that sometimes people say that we're trying to just gin up fees or gin up business, and that's why we charge so much. Well, first I would say to that, one, we only charge what it costs, no more, no less, and that's what only we're allowed to charge under U.S. law. Second, I think it's fair to say that demand for visas is already very strong. We don't need to make more. We are just simply, in fact, we try to meet the demand as much as we can.
Hello, finally, before I let you go, there are reports that the U.S. Embassy in Ghana has a quota system where there's a day to give a number of visas. The more reason why we are seeing a number of denials. Is that really the case?
No, that is not the case at all. Every case is decided on the basis of the qualifications of the person who's in front of them. There are no quotas. There are no guidelines that you can only issue so many visas. In fact, when an officer is at the visa interview window, they don't know whether or not they're going to issue the next person who comes up to talk to them. They are going to make that decision based solely upon what the applicant says and what is in their application and any other information that the officer gathers during the interview. There are no quotas, and that's why we tell people that you put your best foot forward, prepare for the interview, and as much as possible, we welcome Ghanaians who are coming to travel to the United States as long as they follow the rules.
So for Ghanaians who desire to go to the U.S., what will you tell them finally?
What I would say to Ghanaians who want to go to the U.S. is that if you follow the rules, if you obey the law, and you go for the purpose of which you said you were going to go and for which the visa was given, you will have a safe, happy trip to the United States.
Elliot, thank you very much for your time. Elliot Fedig is the Consul General at the U.S. Embassy here in Ghana. Thank you very much for your time. You're still listening to Eyewitness News, and this is Point Blank on Eyewitness News.